the same old thing that the better your soil, the better your garden is going to be. So your soil is needs a lot of attention. And I grow on sand. I live in the Henderson Survey in Brantford, and it's all sandy soil. So it's not one of those things that, oh, every couple of years I have to amend. I have to mend my garden every year, not just for my vegetables. It is a raised bed, so I have brought in soil. I still have to amend that every year as well. But for the perennials, you know, they not many of them like beach sand, which basically is what the soil is. So sand is great. Some plants will grow on sand because it gives you plenty of air down at the root area. But the problem is that the soil drains very quickly. And when water runs through soil, it also takes the nutrients with it. So building it up with compost and shredded leaves, or bringing in manure, or, well, rotted manure is always better, but and adding peat moss every now and then is going to help that soil hold the moisture and hold the nutrients to support plant life. So sand is one. The other, of course, is clay. And there's a lot of areas within Brantford. And I know you guys are on a community garden, so your soil is pretty much set. But even if you're doing gardening at home, some of you may have the clay. And yes, it holds the water really well, almost too well, because then it doesn't allow that airspace down around the roots. So the plant could, depending on how heavy that clay is just more or less drowned in the area, or rot because of the moisture. So again, adding compost, adding maybe some sand to your clay, adding shredded leaves, manure, all works in to build better airspace, a better structure to your soil, and makes it more productive for the plants that you're going to be growing in it by adding the nutrients as well. So what we used to do long time ago is double dig. And double dig, if your area is small, is maybe still okay. I'm doing the no-till gardening where I don't till or dig. But the idea is you would dig a trough, throw the soil, as you can see there in the picture, off to the side, and then you move over and dig another trough, put that soil in the empty trough that you just dug, and keep moving. And then the last trough, you take that soil that you first dug out and put it in. So your soil has been turned over, it's well worked. Make sure you never do this when it's wet, or you've ruined your soil for that year. But when it's drier, and it's a great way of getting deep into your soil. And again, then tillers came along, and again, if you like to till, the thing with tilling and double digging or digging in your soil is that you often are turning up the weeds that have been buried over the season. So your weeding becomes, again, a little more of an issue than you needed it to be than if you did the no-till, or, you know, just gently working your soil. And if you're not walking on your soil, like with raised beds, there isn't really a need to do a lot of tilling. So raised beds, and many people are using raised beds. This is sort of the simple form of a raised bed, of just sort of with your rake, you've pulled up the soil and you keep adding more soil to it every year. So it's raised maybe 6 inches, 8 inches, 9 inches, 10 inches. If it gets any higher than that, it kind of spills over on itself, which is fine. That's not a big deal. But then you've got straw or something on your walkways, which is great because it keeps the weeds down. And this is where you're going to be working. So if you're down on your knees planting, or, you know, maybe doing a bit of weeding, it's much more comfortable than just being on the bare ground. So this is kind of like a no-till kind of approach, but also raising that soil higher off the ground because it warms up faster. You're going to get on that soil a little bit faster, a little bit earlier than you would if it was flat ground. So most of us are used to this, where you've got your raised bed with a structure, be it wood, or here we've got plastic or whatever to support the soil. You've got your walkways in between and around. You can reach it from either side, so you're not walking in there, so there's no compaction. And again, you're amending this soil every year. It's a little bit different if you're growing a perennial flower, let's say, or a shrub or a tree, than with your vegetables, because your vegetables are pretty heavy feeders for most part. They need a lot of that nutrient in the soil to support their growth. Onions and tomatoes and peppers like to have, you know, a lot of nutrients as they're growing. So that's important to amend your soil so it's not being depleted of its nutrients. So what do we amend our soil with? What are some good ideas? Of course, manure. I like well-rotted manure. Fresh manure is probably your best, but you don't want to put that on prior to planting. You would put your fresh manure on probably in the fall. Let it overwinter, let it leach out a little bit so it's not going to be really hot. If you put any plants in fresh manure, just burn them. So at least it's sitting over the winter time. And if your soil, again, if you're not compacting it by walking on it, it's going to work itself down in. You get worms, you get microbes. It's going to work all that manure or whatever amendment you put in down into the soil. So if you have to turn a little bit over, that's fine, but you're not having to turn a lot over. But manure, being an animal-based amendment, is going to improve the structure of your soil. It's going to provide lots of nutrients for your plants, and you're going to see quite a difference. But any livestock manure is going to be fine, but do not use dog or cat manure. And the reason for that, I've had one woman say, oh yeah, my dog, I just clean up in the yard and put that on my vegetable garden. It's not a good practice because they are herbivores or meat eaters, where your other livestock, your cow, your horse, your sheep, or chicken are vegetarian. So their manure is not going to have any bacterias in it that a meat eating animal's manure would produce. So cat and dog do not use that. So aged manure, as I say, I get 3-year-old manure from a farmer friend of ours. It's great stuff. And it's that straw that works down and really helps to improve the structure of the soil. It doesn't provide as much nutrient, but it certainly improves the structure. And again, I'm amending it with other things as well, which we will talk about. Now, this is, does anyone recognize what this is? It looks disgusting, I know, but does anyone know what this might be? Any hands? It's worm castings. And worm castings are one of the highest nutrient available manure, if you wish to call it that. It's worm poop. And it's one of the highest, and it is one of the best. You could plant, there was a lady we were talking earlier that she couldn't grow her little seedlings. You plant the worm castings and you'll have great seedlings as long as you've got the light. The light is also key. But again, we do have worms in our soil. So we do have castings in our soil, but these would be from your red wigglers, you know, I'm sure you've seen programs, and maybe you have worms in your home now where you put your compost into the bin, the worm bin, and it works it down. This is the byproduct of that, and it's excellent stuff. You can buy it. It's pricey, but it's well worth every penny you spend. Maybe on a smaller scale, I'm not sure on a really, really large vegetable garden, but any bit of worm castings in your soil would certainly be a benefit. The other thing we're going to add to our soil, and I think most people do this as well, is their compost. And I certainly hope, I do a lot of programming on teaching kids how to garden, and Compost is one of those things that, yes, we've got all these kitchen scraps that maybe we throw them in the garbage, but why? You know, this fabulous stuff. This is like gold. You put it in your compost and then you put it on your garden, and it's just, again, improving that structure of the soil, moisture retention in the soil, and nutrients in your soil. So yeah, we'll talk later about Ruth Stout's garden, if anyone's familiar with Ruth Stout and her way of gardening. But usually you put it in a compost bin or a pile, let it decompose so you get nice humus or a nice finished product, rather than putting what you're seeing in the screen right in your garden. Because in order for these vegetables and peelings, etc., to decompose, they are taking up nitrogen. They need nitrogen to feed the microorganisms to break this down. So it might deplete the nitrogen in the soil away from your vegetables. So you got to sometimes keep that in mind. But once it's decomposed and it's that great humus that we put onto our garden, then it's fine. But there's ways of working around that, and we just don't have the time to talk too detailed about that. So compost, we make it, we can put it on our garden, and our garden is truly going to benefit from it. Sometimes if we have a small compost bin, we're not getting a whole lot. You can certainly buy compost as well. This is a cover crop. And again, in your community gardens, maybe you can, maybe you can't put in a green cover crop. So this would be like a rye, winter rye that you might put on at the end of the season, and it grows during the winter and first thing in the spring before it gets too big. You can either turn it through if you are tilling, or what I've done is rip it out and put it in my compost. So you've got like this green compost or green material that really helps to quicken the well, I can't even talk tonight. It helps to speed up the decomposition in my or compost bin. So I don't till, so I'll just rip it out. But what it does is it really breaks up that soil and improves the structure and adds a lot of nutrient down. And really the roots get down very, very deep. So it breaks up that soil deep where your root crops will benefit, your carrots, your potatoes, your radishes, your beets, that sort of thing. So a lot of farmers, of course, use the green cover crop during the winter time. It protects the soil. And it also adds the nutrient and breaks up the soil deep down. Leaf mold. We rake up our leaves, we put them in bags, we put them at the curb and say goodbye. Why not rake up those leaves, put them in a pile, put plastic over them for the winter, and then you can see the difference between one hand to the other. We use our leaf mold. We go and gather your bags along the curb and bring them home with us and make a large pile of leaf mold. And it's excellent for amending the soil, or I use it as a mulch in my perennial beds because it is excellent to keep the moisture in. It also breaks down as as the season goes on, amending the soil, but it really helps on retaining the moisture. And again, the less watering we have to do, the better it is, because our vegetables do not want to be stressed in regards to moisture. It's okay if your tomato plant maybe wilts a little bit, but you don't want that to happen very often, and you don't want it to wilt very, very long, because it stresses the plant, and then you get all kinds of problems happening. Bark chip. Bark chip is another amendment that you can put on your soil. You usually think of bark chip, which is fine, on walkways, so that you have something sturdy to walk on and it's not muddy after a rain and the rest of it. you get a fine shredded bark chip rather than the big coarse bark chip, and it's fine too. But you can put that as a mulch around your bigger vegetables. I'm not sure around your lettuces and, the smaller kind of vegetable, but your peppers, your eggplants, your tomatoes. And it, again, keeps the moisture in, and eventually it's going to break down and amend that soil as well. So it depends on what, if you can get a hold of it. Sometimes tree companies will put it through their chipper, and you can either pick it up if they have a drop-off area, or if you know someone and they can chip it and bring it over to you. But it makes an excellent amendment in your soil over a longer period of time, because a bark chip takes a while to break down. So Ruth Stout's garden, I keep talking about Ruth Stout. I saw a movie about her years and years now, but just to give you a perspective, she was around 35 in 1928. So of course she's not living any longer, but she was a gardener that I can really relate to. She bought some property, I think in Connecticut area, and wanted to do vegetable gardening, and she planted rows that were like 500 feet long, and the garden was like enormous. And again, she kept bringing it, reducing the size. And everyone said, oh no, we have to till it. You put manure on it. And she was building her soil up and the rest of it. Well, she said the weeding was just so tough. And here I was composting on one pile, carrying that compost over to my garden to put it onto my garden. Why don't I just compost right on my garden? So she would put a layer of straw, maybe 6 inches of straw, not hay, but straw. And then she would throw her compost, her kitchen waste, green manure, whatever she had in the garden, and just let it go. And she said, if you didn't like the look of my grapefruit rinds, just kick it under the rhubarb leaf and no one will see it. So then to plant, she would move the straw aside, do her row, put the drill in, put the seeds, leave the straw aside until they germinate. And as they grew, she'd then put the straw back around the stems. And she didn't get any weeds. The material would decompose and keep the soil amended. Now, she had to add some lime and gypsum to it every now and then, depending on the pH, as well as maybe a bit of extra nitrogen just because of the microorganisms like I described before. But the soil was always moist and it never was compacted. It always was light and fluffy. So she never had to till, she never had to turn it over. And she had the best production in her vegetables. And she wrote a book about it. I'm reading it now and it's delightful. This lady from back in the 30s and 40s talking about the farmers in the area, thinking she was absolutely crazy, and how they came around to her thinking and saying, boy, this woman's doing really well with her vegetables and she's not working very hard. And like she said, I'd rather go read a book than weed my vegetable garden. So this sort of fit the bill. So something to think about. Don't always think your garden has to be done the way everyone else does it, and maybe think outside the box from time to time and try new things. Yeah, some years you might say, no, this doesn't work, and try something different, but everything's worth a try. And if it helps to reduce the weeding, that's good in my books. Let me tell you, I don't mind weeding. I love to weed, but if I don't have to do it, I'm that much happier. So we're at the 8:30 mark. I'm going to open it up for questions. I could have gone on and on and on and on, but this is a subject, as any horticultural subject. I could teach fertilizer, for 2 or 3 hours, or I could teach, soil conditioning for 2 or 3 hours. But you're getting the brief Cole's notes on it here. So are there any questions? Yes, Caitlin.
Sorry, do you want to unshare your screen, Nancy, so we can see?
Yeah, so you can
everyone.
see.
There we go. There we go. Okay, Natalie has a question.
Yes, Natalie. Do you need to remove the straw at all during any phases of the plant? No, you do not. You can leave that straw, but as I say, you would pull it aside if you're planting seeds, because the seeds need to have, once they germinate, they need to have that sun. But as they grow, maybe they are, let's say, beans. Once they get up to maybe 6 to 8 or 10 inches, then you would move the straw back. Don't put it too close to the stems, because if the moisture could rot those stems, but you just sort of pull it back so it's a bit of a mulch around the plant. I wouldn't put it right up. You know, I'm thinking as a horticulturalist here, wouldn't put it right up to the stem, but certainly use it like a mulch around the base of the plant. But you don't have to remove all of that straw. No. I have always put straw down. Good. Sounds good. Thank you. Great.
My question, can I ask my question?
Yeah, for sure. Go ahead, Natalie.
I'm going to be planting for the first time this year herbs like oregano, rosemary, and what's the third one?
Basil, I hope.
Thyme.
Oh,
those
thyme.
those Mediterranean type herbs.
Yes.
And
Yes.
all the books I'm reading talk about making sure that your soil has good drainage for these guys.
Yes.
And my garden is mostly compost, a layer of dead leaves, but the whole thing otherwise is compost. Is that going to
Sounds
be
like
enough?
that will be perfect.
Oh.
Compost and leaf mold, that gives you great drainage.
Oh,
You will be fine, because again, it's providing the nutrient, but compost also is light and friable. The term friable means that you take your soil and squeeze it, and then you can break it apart quite easily. Like it breaks apart easily in your hand. Or a clay, you squeeze it really tight and it stays like a ball. Where sand, you squeeze it and you can't make a ball out of it at all. So your soil will be fine. It's nice and loose. Compost will provide that, and they should be fine. They should be fine.
now it's going to be in the same bed as berries like blueberries and raspberries.
Yeah.
They can share the same type of soil? I don't have to amend for them
They
differently? No.
Not at all. And your strawberries, you'll probably have straw under them. Just keep them clean. So that's fine, or something underneath of them to keep them clean.
Okay.
Thus the name strawberries. But no, they will grow very well in that. I grow my herbs mainly in pots, but I do grow them in my vegetable garden for those that I use a lot of. I dry my herbs, so I'll use a lot of them, but they grow well. They grow really well. And thyme, I just use it as a ground cover. It's a woolly thyme, but it's it's still I walk on it. Poor thing hardly has any chance, but it does well.
Awesome.
Does well.
Good news.
Perfect. Cheryl, you have a question?
I do, thank you. Of course, I don't have the updated version of Zoom and I have nowhere to raise my hand. Thank you. So I was interested to see the handful of worm castings. I did not recognize them. I farm red wigglers at home and mine doesn't look anything like that unless it was such a close-up picture. Mine is beautiful, loose. Well, they call it black gold, right?
Yes.
So I was just wondering if there was something different about that, or was it just such a close-up picture that it was?
It may have.
Okay.
May have. I don't really know. It's not my picture. I don't have red wigglers. But the point being is that it is worm castings. Maybe it's another type of worm. I'm not sure.
Yeah,
but
interesting.
Point being that it is the worm castings. And again, we have worms, or dew worms, or earthworms in our gardens, and they're throwing off castings as well as they're eating all of our organic matter to make it into a soil type structure. So any will be great. But do you like your red wigglers, and do you like the worm castings?
I'm obsessed with this whole process now. And like you say, I mean, it's such a magical product that really you don't really need to top your whole bed. So really, if I'm transplanting something, I put some in the hole with it, right? So, and just to let everybody know, if people are interested in that, that is a topic that we do have a couple little videos on the page, but we will cover this if people are interested in learning more about either putting worm towers into their beds or just having having the worms in your house to make castings to put outside.
Do you get your worms from Kathy with the red wigglers?
So no, these were split out from a friend of ours. I am on a list to get 1,000 more from Kathy. I ordered and paid in February. I have none. They have such a shortage in Ontario. So a business opportunity for anybody that's looking for a job, start farming red wigglers because we can't get them.
I just might keep that in mind. I like that idea.
Yeah. I'm thinking about it.
Because again, you put that out on Facebook and you'd be inundated with people getting worms for sure.
Yeah.
Keep your eye out for the bales of straw being thrown out after something. Yes, I got my request in for some bales because they don't have to be fresh straw bales. And really, if you're not familiar, straw is the bedding that farmers use as bedding. Hay is what they feed them. You do not want the hay. You want the straw. And as a farmer, I think, doesn't everybody know that? But you'd be surprised when people say, well, what's the difference between hay and straw? A big difference. And I know Brantford, we're a farming community, but if you're not that familiar with livestock, it can be an easy mistake. So if you are asking someone, make sure it is straw you're getting. And even your leaf clippings from cutting your grass, it's great to leave those clippings on your grass, definitely. But if it was maybe a little longer than it should have been and you cut it and it's a little heavier, break up some of that and put that on your vegetable garden as well, either as a mulch to start with or put it right into your compost. It's a green material that will help with the decomposition. Any other?
Yeah, I may not pronounce this correct, so I apologize. It's Bergie? Sorry.
Hi, yeah.
Yes.
I actually put in the short form because the full name is Brigitte, but I have two questions. I recently, or in this past year, moved from Toronto, and I've only known how to do container gardening because I had full sun all day. I had to find a way where I could retain the moisture in containers, and I used coconut coir. So I don't know if anyone has any experience with that, but it helps aerate the soil and retain moisture. I don't know whether it actually has any nutrients, but I used organic mushroom compost. I also used coffee grounds to aerate the soil. And
you are a great candidate to raise red wigglers. All those products you're using, let me tell you.
Yes. And
and
coffee grinds are one of the best. They do make the soil a little more acidic, and having your soil tested from time to time every couple of years isn't a bad idea. I say that, and I don't think I've had the house that I've been in, I don't think I've had my soil tested once. But if everything's growing well and you're not seeing any real issues, it's maybe one of those steps that you don't need to take. But coffee grinds, I'm often tempted to go to Starbucks and say, hey, give me all your coffee grinds. But putting it in the compost is great. I know people throw them right into their garden. That's where I'm a little iffy, but in the compost, it's great. And coconut husks, great. They take a little longer to break down because they are hard, but they're excellent. They would have a nutritional value. I just don't know what that is. Like, I don't know what the nitrogen, phosphorus, potassium would be in that, but certainly as they break down, they would provide nutrients. So you are doing all the right things to keep that moisture, because containers versus soil or ground gardening, your containers tend to dry out a little bit faster because they're above ground. It's a smaller quantity of soil, but let me tell you, you can grow some fabulous things in containers.
oh yeah,
Fine, better than sometimes on the ground gardening, because it depends what your soil is like.
Yeah, so I use that, and I also saved because I'm mostly vegan, but I had friends save their eggshells for me, and I cleaned them out, and then I ground those up in a coffee grinder, and I have like a yogurt tub full of them, and I would sprinkle a little bit, in particular around the tomato plants because of the nutrients in the eggshells. But I would get it to a powdery form so they could get some of the nutrients.
And that's a very good point because again, as I say, I talk about jump into other people's subjects here, but tomatoes, one of the concerns that we've had, and I'm sure if you have grown tomatoes over the years, you've had it, is the bottom rot, the black bottom rot. And the tomato looks perfectly fine on top. You turn it over and it has this big black sort of hollowed out space in the bottom. And that is lack of calcium. So putting, now again, I've seen where they put a whole egg in when they're potting up their tomato, and I don't think you need to do that. I think your eggshells are perfectly fine. Putting it in the hole where your tomato is going to be, your transplant. And another trick is getting powdered milk, watering it so it's a liquid, and then just draining that. I grow my tomatoes in pots, and I just put the milk in the pot, just like I'm going to water it, and it just cleared the problem right up. It's not going to fix the tomato with the black spot, but the new tomatoes are not going to have it. So it's just the calcium, and eggs and milk or anything like that is a really positive thing, and you're not having to go out and buy all this fancy fertilizer. So it's a win-win.
And thank you. And I was also, from my readings, I'd read that you're not supposed to put them directly where you're going to plant, but like mix it in, like give it a few inches around where you're going to plant the seedling, so that, I forget why, but there's a reason why not to put it directly where the roots are going to initially touch until they get used to the soil. And then every once in a while I would like with a fork, because it was all containers, dig it up a bit and then sprinkle some more of the eggshell stuff and like water it in.
And the reason, and I don't know for certain, but a young seed or transplant, when you first plant it, the roots are pretty tender. So eggshells are pretty sharp. So it might be the reason that as you're putting the soil in around these nice tender roots with the eggshells sort of mixed in with it or near it, it could be cutting those roots. Where if it's just off from the roots, and as they work their way through that soil, they become quite tough. So they would be able to work through that eggshell fairly well.
Okay.
I'm assuming that would be part of it.
Okay. I wanted to know, you mentioned the name of the gardener who was doing that straw tilling in the 30s and 40s in the book.
Yes.
What is the name of the person and the book?
Her name is Ruth Stout, Stout, and I'll just grab the book. Again, it's not a recent book, of course, but it is How to Have a Green Thumb Without an Aching Back, a New Method of Gardening. So back in the 30s and 40s, this was a new way of gardening, sort of the organic gardening kind of push. And she wasn't making any, money off of this. She just went, I'm a lazy gardener. I don't like breaking my back. So this is what I've done. And I let other people know about it. But it's a delightful read because she's was quite a character. So just reading through it it's made me laugh. Really, truly did.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Well, we're about 8:45, and I know that Caitlin, her bedtime is at 9.
I can push a little bit. Jonathan has a question.
Kidding. But I know that you guys have other things to discuss. So I just want to thank you for joining us tonight, and good luck on your garden. If I can only give a little bit of advice, one more thing would be take chances. Do things that you think, well, I wonder if it will work. try it. And it might not. But journaling is another thing. And I think that's another session we're going to be doing. But writing down the varieties you've chosen this year and things that work, things that didn't work. So if they didn't work, don't make that mistake again next year. You've written it down, so you'll know that, oh yeah, I can't do that because it really, or try to figure out why it didn't work. And then, write down your observations or your thoughts or whatever. And then next year it might be successful, who knows?
That's awesome. Thank you so much, Nancy. Do you have time? Just Jonathan has a quick question. Well, I think it might be quick.
Please.
Hi, Nancy. Thanks for your input tonight. It was awesome to hear. You're mentioning that not putting manure on it this time of year, but doing it in the fall because of the fresh stuff. But what about buying you can buy bag stuff from Lowe's or Home Depot?
Perfectly fine because that has been well aged. That's perfectly aged. So that's perfectly fine. It's
to
just,
put on this time of year?
Yes. When I say fresh, the cow delivered it yesterday. You don't want to put that on
Yeah.
in the fall and let winter sort of bleach it out and let it decompose a little bit because that's just too fresh for the plant. They'll burn them. Yeah, truly would.
Okay, cool. Thank you.
Okay, awesome. Thank you so much, Nancy. I really appreciate you coming and sharing all this wonderful information, as I'm sure everybody else does. I'm sure everyone's now even more excited to get their garden started. So thank you again for coming.
Great time of the year. Thank you. Bye for now.
Thank you. Okay, so I'm hoping everyone enjoyed that and got some valuable information and is ready to start their gardens if you haven't already. Does anybody have any questions for anything else, or if you guys want to talk about anything, share anything real quick or anything at all? Yes, Brian.
I was trying to get a message on the chat. It wouldn't work for me.
Oh, shoot. Sorry.
No, I was just going to mention about the compost. Everybody knows the city landfill has it available. And Cheryl, can you confirm, is it operational now?
Yes, it is. And it's a limit of 2 containers, garbage can size to each home.
Perfect. That's at the dump on Mohawk?
Yes.
Okay. Perfect. Sarah? You have a question?
Yeah, I was just wondering, what's the status of if we're waiting for deliveries for garden kits and what have you?
Do you want me to answer that?
Sure you can.
Okay, so we're just finalizing some of those. Anything that's in the county, we are waiting. Dragonfly still does not have their soil ready yet. The wet weather has really bogged them down in terms of screening and stuff. So we're just waiting for the green light there. Kat will probably be sending out a message in the next day or 2. So obviously if you're receiving a delivery from Dragonfly in the county, they're not delivering your kit. So Saturday we're going to have we're going to set up one more block of time for people to come and pick up what still needs to be picked up. So Kat and I are just going to finalize that after this meeting, and all of you who are waiting for something will get a message from her.
Natalie, you have a question?
Yeah, so as I mentioned earlier, I'm going to be planting some berries, among which are blueberries, and I've heard that those require some acidic ground. So my plan is, my in-laws have a very big evergreen in their front lawn, very old, probably has a ton of needles right underneath it. Would that be the best solution for me to make a quick amendment for the blueberries specifically?
That will be one of the best, and I'll leave this to anybody who's got good experience with blueberries. Blueberries are very tough in this environment. We haven't had a single garden have success with them at the community gardens. They're very tough. Blackberries, raspberries, gooseberries, all of those are great. Blueberries, and that's why, when you go up north, there's all these wild blueberry patches. It's because they're in the middle of all kinds of coniferous trees and there's a very acidic soil, right? So So, I mean, if anybody else has something that's worked for them, would love to hear it, but that will be and really as much as you can pile in there. They're tricky.
Okay. I figured worst case scenario, they're pretty plants.
I was just gonna say, I have 2 dwarf blueberry plants that I planted in 2 containers, like fairly large containers last year. I didn't do anything to them over winter, and they're already like starting to have a fair amount of kind of blossomy stuff on them. What I do is I put a lot of coffee grounds in the soil to make sure to increase like the acidity. And then I also have some sort of, I can't remember the name of it, but it increases the acidity of the soil. And I put that in every now and then when I water, and it's an itty bitty little plant, but it was covered in blueberries last year. So it's possible, but I would probably recommend getting like the smaller dwarf varieties that are bred to have a lot of berry in a smaller bush, and then making sure that they're in some sort of container, because then you can control the soil pH otherwise. So it's possible, but it is tricky, like Cheryl
You
said.
say dwarf, does it get good? Like how big does it get? Like 3 feet? Not even?
No, it's way smaller. So they're maybe like 1.5 feet high.
Oh, wow.
To maybe 2.5 feet wide or so. They're not very large, but you can get a whole bunch of berries from them.
Yeah, even normal size ones that aren't wild berries, you're probably looking at 4 to 5 feet.
Yeah.
Max. Ours were closer to 3 before they died.
Cool. Thank you.
Okay, does anybody else have anything at all? Questions? Nothing? No? Okay, I found this. Hang on, I have to figure out how to share my screen. I thought it was pretty funny, so I just want to share this with you. I showed it to my 10-year-old and he didn't get it, but I think you guys might get it. Can you see that? Okay, that's all I have. Again, if you guys have any other questions, or have any other questions, comments, or anything, you know where to find me. Shoot me an email, and we will do our best to help you out. I have no idea how to stop sharing this. Oh, stop share right there. Okay.
And please invite anybody you know that might be interested in this information. We've got a whole bunch of workshops lined up, and we're trying to fill a couple of the gaps. But we welcome everybody.
Yes, you don't have to be a part of like any program with us. If you are just interested in gardening, by any means, just share along. Okay, thank you so much for taking the time to come and join us tonight, and we will see you next week.
Thank
Good night,
you.
everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks.
Enjoy your week.
Bye.
Nice to see everybody.